Welcome back to the deep dive. Our job, as always, is to cut through that noise, take a really complex stack of information, and give you the strategic briefing you need fast. Now, before we get into today's main topic, I just have to say, wow, CyberCon 2025 down in Melbourne recently. What an event.
Oh yeah, the energy was something else, wasn't it?
It really was. Thousands of InfoSec professionals, all gathered by AESA, the Australian Information Security Association, and the vendor expo floor, just buzzing.
All the big names were there: Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, Wiz, Cloudflare.
Rapid7, you name it, all showing off the latest, the cutting edge in cyber tech, both defensive and offensive.
And the talks, the panel discussions.
Absolutely. So many concurrent sessions. It was genuinely insightful. Honestly, a delightful experience. I really think if you're an InfoSec professional, you should try and get there. It felt essential.
Agreed. You see all that advanced tech, the AI detection system?
Exactly. But, what we're diving into today really proves that even with all that shiny armor, sometimes the simplest human failure, well, that's still your biggest threat vector.
It always comes back to people, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
So if you find these deep dive sessions valuable, how we break down these complex topics, please do remember to like, subscribe, and share. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you more content like this. Okay, so our mission today, we're focusing squarely on the Qantas 2025 cyber incident. We've pulled together sources from the CSO platform, aviation ISAC data, regulatory filings, media reports, the works.
Yeah, quite a stack.
Our goal here is to really dissect this event. It feels like a watershed moment, doesn't it? We want to extract those key strategic lessons. And look, this isn't just about one airline. It's become a global case study, I think, in 3 critical areas.
Right. Supply chain risk.
Identity failure.
And, crucially, that third piece, executive accountability. Yeah, this is really where the theory of cybersecurity meets the messy reality of operations. What makes the Qantas situation so fascinating, I think, is how they managed a technical containment win.
Right. They stopped the bleeding in some core areas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they suffered this absolutely devastating governance and identity loss. It just perfectly highlights how the extended enterprise, that whole network of third-party vendors, outsourced staff, it's fundamentally changing what we even mean by the corporate perimeter.
That perimeter is just dissolving, isn't it?
It's becoming incredibly porous.
Okay, let's unpack the initial shock then. The confirmation hits on July 9th, 2025. Qantas Airways data breach. And the number. That's what grabs you first. 5.7 million unique customer records affected.
It's a staggering number.
Puts it right up there with Australia's biggest data disasters in recent memory, right? It just confirms this trend. Major data losses are now counted in the millions, routinely.
And the timeline. Look how fast it moved, especially with social engineering in the mix. Qantas spots unusual activity June 30th. Public disclosure comes super quick, July 1st. That shows transparency, you have to give them that. But then the threat actors wait. They make their extortion demand on July 7th. And by July 9th, Qantas is putting out the comprehensive confirmation notifying customers. It's a compressed time frame.
That initial communication must have been absolutely critical because Qantas had to immediately stress what wasn't compromised.
Yeah.
And that, from an architectural perspective, that was a huge win for them, wasn't it?
Absolutely huge. We need to be really specific here. The reports are clear. Credit card details, personal financial info, passport details, account passwords, PINs, login credentials, all safe.
Wow.
Stored separately. Hardened environments, different access controls. That architectural segmentation, that saved them from a potentially much, much worse financial or even national security crisis.
So the core systems held firm, but the periphery,
Right.
the customer data repositories, they didn't. What exactly was in those 5.7 million records that got out?
Well, the loss was still devastating. Enough for secondary fraud, identity theft.
Oh.
It's serious. So 5.7 million unique records total. It breaks down into 2 main groups.
Okay.
First, you got 4 million standard records.
Yeah.
That's names, emails, frequent flyer numbers, enough to craft some pretty convincing phishing emails, right?
Definitely.
But second, and this is the really damaging part, there was a high-impact subset of 1.7 million records. For these people, the attackers got home addresses, business addresses, maybe hotel stays, dates of birth, phone numbers, even supplementary stuff like gender, meal preferences.
Wow. That level of detail.
That's PII gold. That's what criminals use to bypass KYC, know your customer checks at banks, or launch really targeted identity theft. That richness enables genuine impersonation.
Okay, that kind of detail, the social engineering focus, the vishing, it points towards attribution, doesn't it? Security researchers seem pretty confident about who is behind this.
Yeah, there's high confidence pointing towards that notorious group, Scattered Spider, also known as UNC 3944. They often operate under the banner Scattered Lapsus Hunters. And these guys, they're less about finding some obscure zero-day exploit and more about manipulating the organization itself, the human element.
What's the typical profile for Scattered Spider? You hear the name, you think organized crime, but the sources suggest something. Well, almost stranger.
They are quite unique and highly effective. Sources describe them as sort of a loose network, but technically skilled individuals, often young. Some reports mention teens, people in their early 20s.
Really?
Yeah, globally distributed too. US, UK, Europe. Their main motivation, sure, it's profit, but there's also this strong element of peer recognition.
Wow.
You want to score that big win, impress their friends online.
That makes them sound fast, opportunistic.
Exactly, and very willing to repeat tactics that work, especially across similar sectors like aviation. Which brings us to the key point here.
The attack vector.
Precisely. They didn't breach Qantas's core flight systems. They didn't use some super complex custom vulnerability. They went after a third-party customer servicing platform.
Okay, a vendor system.
Reportedly, one used extensively by the Qantas call center down in Manila. And the way in, pure social engineering. Specifically, vishing voice phishing, targeting help desk staff or call center agents.
Vishing! That takes persistence, psychological manipulation, and wasn't there a warning? I seem to remember the sources mentioning the FBI specifically alerted airlines about this group using this exact technique just days before.
That's absolutely correct. Days before the initial detection, which makes this a known risk, supposedly mitigated, that still got through.
Unbelievable.
And the specific techniques they used, well, they mapped directly onto the Empire 18CK framework. Let's trace that path, because it really throws the human weakness into sharp relief.
Okay, lay it out for us.
All right, under initial access, TVA0001, you've got T1566.004, spear phishing voice or vishing, targeting those call center folks, combined with supply chain compromise indirectly because the third-party platform was the door.
How did the vishing call typically work?
They'd go up, often pretending to be legitimate internal IT support, creating a sense of urgency. We need to fix this now. Your access is being revoked unless. That kind of pressure.
And that pressure plays right into how they get credential access, TA0006. This is where the tech controls should kick in, but they use the human factor to bypass them.
Exactly right. They use T1621, multi-factor authentication request generation. We know it better as MFA bombing or MFA fatigue.
Ah, the constant notifications trick.
Precisely. Plus, standard push notification MFA, it's designed to stop an unauthorized digital login attempt. But if I'm on the phone with you, convincingly pretending to be IT support, I can trigger dozens of those push requests to your phone, one after another.
Bing, bing, bing.
Exactly. It's like someone leaning on your doorbell at 3 a.m. Eventually, you might not even care who it is. You just want the damn noise to stop. So in a moment of frustration, stress, maybe trying to be helpful to IT, you hit approve.
And boom, they're in.
You've just unwittingly handed over access. Then they use T1656, impersonation. Now they have an active session. Maybe they even authorize a malicious OAuth app to stay persistent. They've tricked the staff member to giving them the keys. No code cracking involved. It's psychology.
A psychological exploit, not a technical one, which leads us neatly into the systemic flaws this exposed.
Yeah, the Qantas breach. Strategically, it's a perfect case study of what happens when the extended enterprise perimeter fails.
Let's define that properly for everyone listening. Qantas is global, but the breach point was a third-party call center in Manila. How does outsourcing like that fundamentally change the risk picture for a company like Qantas?
It expands the attack surface enormously, way beyond the firewalls and security systems Qantas directly controls. Every single vendor, every remote call center agent logging in, they all become potential entry points.
And the weakest link breaks the chain.
In this case, yes. The vendor's controls, or maybe the offshore staff's vulnerability to vishing, that became Qantas's single point of failure, which immediately flags the issue of vendor oversight, or perhaps a lack thereof.
The Australian cybersecurity minister pointed this out quite bluntly, didn't she?
She did, very direct. She said, and I'm quoting here, "You can't simply outsource to other companies and think you've got no obligations on cybersecurity." It implies Qantas either didn't have tough enough security standards in their contract with that vendor,
Or they didn't check.
or they failed to actually audit and verify that those standards were being met in practice. There was a gap in oversight.
What sort of practical things should they have been demanding? Contractually, I mean, things that might have stopped this phishing attack.
Well, they needed to demand specific, modern, phishing-resistant identity controls for all outsourced staff accessing their systems, not just basic MFA.
Like FIDO2 or passkey.
Exactly. Plus, real-time monitoring of those third-party access logs. And strict enforcement of least privilege, something we definitely need to talk more about. You simply cannot overtrust your supply chain anymore. You have to verify constantly.
In that failure to verify, it seems it amplified a deeper, more technical problem, the architectural root cause, because extracting 5.7 million records, that wasn't just one agent's access level, surely.
No, absolutely not. That massive scope that was enabled by the attackers exploiting a vulnerable public-facing API and application programming interface, that API was the pipeline connecting to the customer data platform.
Okay, and what was wrong with the API?
Specifically, it was likely configured with a flaw called broken function-level authorization. It's a common but critical API security vulnerability.
Break that down for us. Broken function level authorization. What does that mean in plain English?
Okay, think of the API like a digital librarian. A normal user, say a call center agent helping one customer, should only be allowed to request one specific book, one customer's record relevant to their immediate task.
Makes sense. Least privilege.
Right. Broken function-level authorization means the compromised account, instead of being treated like a regular librarian assistant, was mistakenly given the keys to the entire warehouse. It had administrator level, or near administrator level, permissions it shouldn't have had.
So instead of getting one record,
It could systematically script the extraction of the entire library, 5.7 million records. It turned a single compromised identity into a catastrophic data haul because the API didn't enforce proper permissions at the function level.
that architectural blunder brings us right back to identity management, which, as you said, the attackers exploited brilliantly. And the Aviation ISAC's 2025 survey confirms identity was already the #1 known concern for the industry.
Yeah, the survey data couldn't be clearer. Across the whole sector, airlines, airports, manufacturers protect identity management, authentication, and access control, PRAA in NIST terms, was the top-ranked category for CISO initiatives. They knew it was critical.
So they were spending money on this.
Millions, likely. Trying to roll out multi-factor authentication, move towards zero trust. This has been a multi-year effort across aviation. The survey details specific focus areas too: better credential management, network integrity, access permissions, specifically mentioning least privilege and separation of duties.
Right, so they knew least privilege was vital.
They absolutely knew. Nearly 30% of the initiatives within that protect category were focused specifically on access permissions. Yet Qantas apparently failed to enforce it properly at that critical API layer.
So the industry identified the target, allocated resources, built defenses, and scattered spiders still walk through the door using MFA fatigue.
A Qantas breach was basically confirmation of what security folks had been warning about. Standard MFA, the kind relying on SMS codes or simple push notifications. It's just not enough anymore against determined social engineering.
It's too easily bypassed by manipulating the person.
Exactly. Combine that vishing urgency with a flood of push notifications, and the human becomes the vulnerability, overriding the technical control.
So what's the answer? What's the mandatory shift organizations need to make right now?
It's clear, and it needs to happen fast. Deploy phishing-resistant MFA, specifically FIDO2 or passkeys, especially for privileged accounts, admin accounts, anyone touching sensitive data repositories.
Why is FIDO2 different?
Because unlike a push notification you can just tap approve on, FIDO2 usually requires a physical key or biometric, and it cryptographically binds the login attempt to the legitimate website URL. This makes phishing and vishing for login credentials effectively impossible at that step. It breaks the social engineering chain.
Okay, so identity and architecture were key failures. But let's talk about the sheer volume again. 5.7 million records. That points to another failure, doesn't it? A governance failure.
Absolutely. Data retention,
Yeah.
or rather data over-retention.
This takes us beyond just security engineering into legal and compliance territory, right? How did holding on to too much old data make the crisis worse?
The massive scale, the 5.7 million figure, it was inflated because that customer service platform held on to historical customer records way past their necessary operational lifespan. This is a direct violation of a core privacy principle in Australia. It's APP 11. But similar principles exist globally, called data minimization.
Only keep what you absolutely need for as long as you need it.
Precisely. Qantas was essentially hoarding sensitive PII names, birth dates, addresses, potentially from customers who hadn't flown with them in years. Why? Probably just because the system was set up that way initially, and nobody ever went back to implement proper data lifecycle management.
So it became a PII hotspot.
Exactly. A huge, attractive target packed with sensitive data, making the eventual breach impact millions larger than it needed to be. This isn't about encryption failing, it's a failure of basic data governance.
So the fix here isn't just a job for the CISO and the tech teams.
No way. This requires tight integration. Security needs to work hand in glove with legal, with compliance, with the business units that own the data and processes. They need to conduct rigorous data audits.
Find those hidden hordes of old data.
Find them and purge them responsibly. Ensure systems are configured to only retain the minimum data needed for current operations. It's the only truly effective way to limit the damage when not if that human firewall fails again somewhere down the line. You simply can't lose data you don't have.
Okay, so after the technical dust settled, the focus shifted very quickly to the legal fallout. Qantas acted fast, trying to contain the data spread by getting an interim injunction from the NSW Supreme Court. That was July 17th.
Yeah, that injunction. It was a necessary step, legally speaking, but strategically pretty weak.
Why weak?
Well, Qantas got it to legally stop the stolen data being accessed or published domestically within Australia. But security experts immediately called it out for what it was. A legal shield, not a technical one. Its main purpose was really corporate signaling.
Showing regulators and customers they were doing something.
Exactly. Showing they were taking steps to mitigate harm. But its actual effectiveness against a group like Scattered Spider, operating globally, anonymously, severely limited, which was proven just 3 months later. The extortion deadline passed, and bang, the data got leaked publicly on international dark web forums in October 2025. A domestic court order can't police the dark web. It was irrelevant in practice.
And while that was happening, the other legal threats were building. The regulatory risk and the looming class action lawsuit. Maurice Blackburn stepped in pretty quickly.
Yeah, Maurice Blackburn, a major plaintiff law firm in Australia, they lodged a representative complaint with the OAIC, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, representing all 5.7 million affected customers.
And the basis of the complaint?
Alleging Qantas failed to take reasonable steps to protect customer data as required under Australia's Privacy Act in 1988. This is a huge threat, make no mistake.
Because of the precedents. Optus, Medibank.
Exactly. Those massive breaches led to huge settlements and fines. The legal environment in Australia is now extremely sensitive to large-scale data breaches. High-stakes cyber litigation is becoming the norm.
And there's a specific reason why this Qantas breach could be even more financially painful than those previous ones, right? The law changed.
That's the crucial point. The reforms of the Privacy Act that came in after 2022 fundamentally increased the penalties for noncompliance. They raised the stakes dramatically.
So what kind of financial hit are we talking about potentially under this tougher legislation?
Potentially very serious penalties, as the government put it. The maximum fine is now the highest of 3 possible calculations. A, $50 million flat, or 3 times the value of any benefit Qantas might have wrongly gained from the data misuse. Or, and this is the big one, 30% of the company's adjusted annual turnover during the relevant period. Given Qantas's size, that 30% figure meant the theoretical maximum penalty could be over $7 billion.
7 billion Australian dollars. Okay. Even if the actual fine ends up being much lower, just the possibility of that number. That gets the board's attention immediately.
Full, undivided attention. And that attention translated directly into something we haven't seen quite so clearly before. Tangible executive accountability. This is the key governance takeaway, I think, for every CISO, every board member listening globally.
Right. The Qantas board didn't just issue a statement. They hit executives in the wallet.
They did. Significant financial penalties for senior leadership. It confirms that cybersecurity failure now has direct, personal financial consequences at the C-suite level.
What were the specifics? How much are we talking?
Well, the CEO, Vanessa Hudson, who, to be fair, was generally praised for her transparency during the crisis. She forfeited $250,000 of her annual bonus.
Okay, significant.
And it wasn't just her. Other senior executives saw a 15% cut to their short-term bonuses. The total hit across the leadership team was around $800,000.
Wow. So this wasn't just symbolic.
Not at all. It sets a really powerful precedent. It says that accountability for managing third-party cyber risk, for enforcing basic governance like data minimization, that's now a measurable part of executive performance. Boards aren't just seeing cyber as an IT problem anymore.
They're linking it directly to executive pay, holding the top brass responsible for these systemic failures.
That's the organizational shift. It's huge. It signals that cybersecurity is truly a board-level, business-critical issue with direct financial consequences for leadership.
Okay, it's really important, I think, to place this Qantas breach, which was fundamentally about human manipulation, right, against the backdrop of the technical threat landscape at the time, mid-2025, because this attack landed just as security teams were already drowning in Microsoft's July 2025 Patch Tuesday.
Oh, that Patch Tuesday was a monster.
Sure.
137 vulnerabilities addressed by Microsoft across their whole ecosystem.
137, just the volume.
The sheer volume is a constant burden on IT teams, right?
Yeah.
And within those 137, 14 were rated critical. And maybe most worryingly, there was one publicly disclosed zero-day vulnerability already being exploited out in the wild.
Okay, let's talk about that 0-day. CVE 2025-49719, it was in SQL Server. What made it so critical, even though its CVSS score was only 7.5?
Right. The score wasn't a 9 or 10, but the danger was immediate because it was publicly disclosed and proof of concept code, BC code, was available to attackers.
So criminals had the recipe.
They had the recipe. The vulnerability itself, Microsoft SQL Server Information Disclosure, allowed an unauthenticated attacker to potentially read uninitialized memory contents from the server.
And in database memory, that could mean
Credentials, connection strings, bits of sensitive application data, remnants of previous database operations, stuff that should never be exposed.
so even without full remote code execution, an attacker could grab enough info to get a foothold or move laterally.
Exactly. They could potentially bypass local controls, steal credentials to access other systems, and this affected widely used versions. SQL Server 2022, 2019, 2017, 2016. These are the engines running countless enterprise applications and data warehouses. So despite the 7.5 score, the existence of that PAC made patching this an immediate, high-priority task.
And if a publicly known 0-day wasn't bad enough, there were also the usual critical remote code execution risks, the RCEs, that really keep CISOs up at night.
Absolutely. That July batch included some really nasty RCEs.
Notably, CVE 2025-47981. That was a flaw in SPNIGO extended negotiation used for integrated Windows authentication. CVSS score 9.8, almost perfect.
What could an attacker do with that?
An unauthenticated attacker could remotely execute code with high privileges on the target system, often without needing the user to do anything at all. It's the kind of flaw that can lead to complete network compromise if it's not patched instantly.
And there were Office RCEs too, the kind that spread via email attachments. Yep. A bunch of those, like CVE 2025-49695, 49696, 49697, all rated around CVSS 8.4. What makes these particularly insidious is the exploit vector. Sometimes they can be triggered just by the file being previewed in the Windows Explorer pane.
The user doesn't even have to open the malicious document.
Exactly. That makes them incredibly effective for mass phishing campaigns. So yeah, the takeaway is security teams are constantly fighting this multi-front war. You've got sophisticated social engineering like at Qantas on one side, and then these complex technical RCEs needing immediate patching on the other. It's relentless.
Which brings us back nicely to the strategic view from within the aviation sector itself. Looking at those aviation ISAC survey results, again, mapped against the NIST CSF 2.0 framework, where were CISOs actually planning to focus their limited resources for the rest of 2025?
Well, the priorities really reflect a clear understanding of the gaps exposed by incidents like Qantas, but also the growing complexity of the threat environment generally. Here are the top 5 categories where they were focusing their risk reduction efforts across airlines, airports, the whole segment.
Okay, number 1.
No surprise here, I guess.
Still protect. Identity management, authentication, access control, IDMFA. Undisputed number 1. The Qantas breach, ironically, just validates this focus, but the key now is accelerating the implementation of truly phishing-resistant solutions.
Right. Number 2.
Governance. Organizational context, GVOC. This one has surged up the priority list. It's all about regulatory compliance, NIS2 in Europe, other schemes, but also ensuring the business really understands and formally accepts its cyber risk posture. Governance overall is taking a huge chunk of CISO initiatives.
Interesting. Number 3.
Identify. Asset management, IDAM, but with a very specific focus now on operational technology, OT, and the industrial Internet of Things, IoT.
The systems controlling the physical world.
Exactly. Air traffic control systems, ground handling equipment, airport building management. Visibility into these OT-IoT environments is notoriously difficult, and compromise there could be physically catastrophic, not just data loss.
Scary thought. Okay, number 4, governance. Supply chain risk management, SCRM, GVSE. Moving way beyond just sending vendors questionnaires. CISOs are committing to continuous monitoring of key suppliers like that Manila call center platform and embedding really rigorous cyber clauses and compliance standards directly into contracts, getting tougher with suppliers.
Makes sense after Qantas. And number 5.
Detect. Continuous monitoring, DECM. Basically, enhancing visibility everywhere, but especially into those tricky OT-IoT environments and also the complex sprawl of multi-cloud setups. You can't protect what you can't see.
It definitely feels like the response is becoming more coordinated, extending beyond individual companies. The sources mentioned some strategic developments reflecting that.
That's right. A really significant one was the Israeli-U.S. ransomware partnership. That's Israel's National Cyber Directorate working closely with U.S. CISA.
What are they doing together?
Focusing on real-time threat intelligence sharing, indicators of compromise, or IOCs, and coordinated takedowns of ransomware infrastructure on the darknet, targeting specific groups like Hive V4 and Black Cat, which often hit critical infrastructure, including aviation.
So, treating ransomware as a national security issue requiring international cooperation.
Absolutely. It signals that shift. And looking ahead, the emerging threat trends flagged in the sources. They just confirm that the methods used against Qantas are being industrialized.
What kind of trends?
We're seeing active probing of 5G network backhauls and OT networks for potential exploits. AI-powered attacks are making social engineering campaigns much faster, more personalized, and harder to detect. And attackers are constantly developing new MFA bypass techniques, more subtle than just MFA bombing.
So the pressure isn't letting up.
Not at all. Which underlines why those ISAP priorities aren't just nice-to-haves. They're essential survival mechanisms for the industry.
Okay, let's bring this all together for our listeners. If the Qantas failures are the lesson, what are the absolute must-do actions, both immediate and strategic, that organizations need to take away from this? Let's start with immediate actions. 0-30 days. What needs doing right now? 1. Patching. Get that SQL Server 0-day CBE 2025-49719 fixed, along with those critical Microsoft RCEs yesterday, ideally. 2. Vendor audits. Immediately review all third-party vendor access, check permissions, enforce least privilege technically, especially at the API layer, no exceptions. 3. Training. High-frequency, high-stress scenario training for staff, especially call centers and help desks. Focus on phishing recognition and clear protocols for handling suspicious MFA prompts. Don't just click approve. 4. Phishing-resistant MFA. Mandate deployment of FIDO2 or passkeys for all privileged accounts, admin accounts, anyone accessing sensitive data. Get rid of SMS and simple push MFA for critical access now.
Those are the immediate fires to put out. Then, looking slightly longer term, strategic improvements, 30-90 days. This is about building resilience. 1. Zero Trust architecture. Start implementing Zero Trust network access, ZTNA. Even if an attacker gets initial credentials, ZTNA severely limits their ability to move laterally, containing the breach impact. 2. Update playbooks. Specifically create detailed incident response plans for supply chain breaches. Include things like pre-negotiated forensic access clauses in your vendor contracts. Don't wait until the breach happens to figure out how you'll investigate the vendor systems. 3. Data minimization program. This is maybe the most strategic. Security leaders must partner with legal and compliance to launch an aggressive, ongoing program to enforce data minimization across the whole extended enterprise. Systematically find and eliminate those unnecessary PII hotspots that attract groups like Scattered Spider. Reduce the target surface area.
That proactive data cleanup feels crucial.
It's fundamental governance.
Okay, let's wrap this up. What's the core lesson here?
Look, the core lesson from the Qantas breach, I think, is that your cyber resilience today isn't just about your internal firewall strength. It's critically defined by the integrity of your identity controls and the real robustness of your supply chain oversight. Qantas, yeah, they achieved rapid technical containment in some areas that was a win. It saved their core systems. But that speed couldn't undo the damage from the governance failure hoarding millions of old customer records and from identity controls that just weren't good enough against clever human manipulation.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to consider. The Aviation ISA survey showed that the entire industry knew identity management and supply chain risk were their top priorities in 2025. They were focused on it. Yet, the Qantas breach happened anyway, exploiting exactly those weaknesses. So the question is, what further organizational failure allowed that human firewall to be so effectively bypassed despite the known risk? Was it just policy not being implemented, or does it point to deeper issues?